Good afternoon, Sunday afternoon. I'm trying to avoid getting too much daylight in there because it... Oh, sorry, killing the thing. Daylight will knacker up the view, but anyway, I also don't want to shut out the lovely spring day. What we've got here is Ryan's Maverick F4. Now this is interesting beastie. British designed by the sounds of it, and Korean made guitar with some cool... I don't know what these remind me of, some of those old keyboards of the 80s anyway, or 80s and 90s. But this guitar has a nice neck, which is well respected apparently. It's supposed to be a really nice shredder type neck. The quick bit of research I could find on it actually called it a 12-inch radius all the way down, although Ryan said it was a compound radius. May or may not be, we'll find out. And not a problem if it is. What this guitar has on it, it's got a nice bolt-on neck, solid heavyweight trem system, loose jack plug as always, and it's got these. It's got the bridge sitting way out of the bushes, sitting way out of the body, so that might need something taken care of. I'm going to take the springs off and have a good look at that. The other thing that struck me about this is that Ryan did mention it in an email. This has got what's called a Buzz Phyton compensated nut thing on it, which is supposedly designed to eliminate these sharp notes at the first 3 frets, which is effectively what I tend to do by setting a really nice low first fret action. So I guess that Buzz Phyton system is intending to do that without reducing the first fret action, so I presume that they would go with a higher than I would go for action, but this system presuming to correct that. Now what it does do for you is it makes the actual scale length slightly shorter. This is a 25-inch scale length, which is a little bit shorter than some, but what they do is this nut overhangs by at least 1 millimeter and cuts down the actual size of this first fret. Now I don't know enough about the system and its claims, but I mean, just theoretically, shortening the scale length will have something of an effect on all of the strings, just as shortening it, getting it wrong at that end, will have an effect on the tuning of all the strings. Although I don't quite get how it would have a different effect here than here, although there is this added issue of the string going sharp because you're pressing downwards if you have a high first fret action. So the question for me really was, rather than try and work out how I've read some of the blurb on the Buzz Phyton system, and to be honest it doesn't communicate to me terribly clearly, but that's not its fault, maybe I just don't get it. But anyway, given it is what it is, given it is overhanging by 1 millimeter, I think it's slightly curved in a sort of crescent this way as well, so it's less compensated or less overhanging right in the middle, but more so at the edges. Whatever that means, the question is, am I going to leave it on, or am I going to go for a familiar nut that I know, or I'm more familiar with what it's doing? I'm sort of tempted to leave it on since I haven't heard one in action or seen one in action. The problem of it is, not a problem, but the issue is if I do leave it on and then I go and set it up with it on, I'll treat it like an ordinary nut, because to be honest I'm not going to leave a high first fret action anyway. And then the question is if I then do that and I find it, because I've corrected the sharp notes here by setting a low first fret action, if this then completely skews the intonation afterwards because of this loss of 1 millimeter distance here between the nut and the first fret, and presumably, not presumably, and technically the distance to every fret afterwards is slightly off compared to what it should be, because this is always 1 millimeter forward, so the whole kind of length is slightly off. Question is, will I just need to knock it off in the end anyway if it doesn't stay and play in tune? So it's a tricky one. I mean, I know I can make this play with a bog standard you know, what do you call them? One of them. You know what? It's silly, isn't it? If I know what I'm doing with one of them, why work with something that isn't isn't necessary, or in my experience isn't necessary if I do things the way I do it. So actually, just to save doing it twice, I think I'm going to take that buzz fighting off, and of course I'll send it back with Ryan so you can use it again on something else. Alright, the main issue with this of course is these bushes sticking a mile out, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is take the spring loading off. I had a quick check, and in reality the way this is currently sitting, I wouldn't be able to get a low action out of it anyway, because it's just miles up. Now what I want to do is just take the the posts out, and we'll take the bridge off, and I'm just going to have a look and see just what is going on with the bushes under here. And there's our bridge, that and that. And so what we've got is these things here. Now I've had a kind of look, and are they meant to be? I can't see in any other photograph. Somebody, knowing my luck, somebody is going to come along and see these. Oh no, they are moving down. There we go. Solve my problem. One of the things is, if you don't have a good resource to look at something and be certain about how it's working, the first thing, you're kind of stuck in the dark a little bit. So thankfully what it just goes to show is these things aren't firmly embedded, so they're coming out, rising out when they shouldn't be. So that's because of the pull of the tremolo. So the thing I'm going to obviously need to do is to glue them in. If they've demonstrated they're already going to come out, there's no point setting it up and having them rise out again, which only completely transforms the action. Now, given that, putting these back into the correct height, there shouldn't be any need for any shimming or anything. If for example I hadn't been able to move them for some reason or other, then what would have been necessary would have been some sort of shim on the neck. So this guitar is also just a bit in need of an overall cling, which I'll sort of do in stages as I kind of get the chance like this. It's a bit mucky, but it's old and well played, which is good. I'm sure I can find a black tip for that selector switch. So there's a few little cracks in the lacquer work here. There's a crunch there. There's a little here's a very familiar split in the wood between from the back of each of these posts. That could be one of the things, one of the reasons it's loose actually. As soon as those holes are stressed or broken in some way, then it's not surprising that the whatsits will come out, the bushes will come out. But as with so many 2-point tremolo systems, it's very weak in that area, or it looks like it's potentially very weak in that area, and it breaks all too easily. And on some, when it breaks, it just pulls the whole arrangement forward and the thing just collapses. And that happened on, for example, way back on Matthias's Japanese Fender Stratocaster, that was actually, well, not on its own it wasn't a write-off, but the fact that the neck was also warped together conspired to make it an economic write-off as far as he was concerned. So we did something else instead, got another guitar for him. But actually not quite true, we used all the innards on another guitar. But this one split in the back there, which is, as I say, it's a common problem with a 2-point floating tremolo, because all of the string loading and all of the spring loading, both sets of forces, are channeled into those two bushing or bushes, and whatever they're trying to do, they're going to split this rather thin little bit of wood. And the question I've got is, see, I don't know if you can't see it with this thing, but it's split there and it's split there. I'll take some close-up pictures. But what it means is, if I could, in fact I can see it, it's split the wood. Of course it has, because that is the nature of this construction. What you've got is you've got a piece of wood that is a bridge of wood basically. You've got your pickup route, your bridge of wood here, and you've got your block, your route for your tremolo, and all of the force both this direction and backwards because of the springs. So all the force is going into those two things, so it's both pulling it out, as we've seen, and it's also split the wood. And that split goes back, you won't be able to see it, but it goes through the back here, and it goes through the back of this tile. It's ridiculous actually. The thickness of this piece of wood here isn't even as thick as that. This is a lip. Underneath that lip, as you can see, the wood is even thinner. So the distance between the wall, the inner wall of this hole, and this timber here, the timber here is almost non-existent, so it's pretty much guaranteed to break with force. Actually, there's nothing I can do to stop that, other than I could strengthen it with something which would probably allow it to continue to work. In fact, it probably would. I could probably strengthen it without there being anything getting in the way of anything. I mean, the point is, if we glue these things in once and for all, and what we're going to get is the likelihood that I can even feel it. You can feel the bulging where it's broken through. Anyway, I'll take some close-up pictures. So I don't want to kind of pause too long, but I suppose I could do some cleaning and stuff, and I'll take the nut off and whatever. But the issue is really, does Ryan want me to try and strengthen this a little bit? And all I'm really thinking of is some steel or copper, thick copper, and some resin as a sort of plate across there. It may go some way to sort of stopping this thing buckling out any further, but there's no, I mean, if we were to just undo this and take this out, you'd see there's some room this side. That's a thick enough piece, but this is just too thin by miles. And it's done because the distance, the thickness of the what's it here is too thin, really, too narrow. It could do with being a wider thing, which would allow you a bigger gap between. In fact, right. In fact, there's a hole. You can actually see through. I didn't even realise that. It's actually gone through. Yep, there it is. Blimey. Right, I'll take some pictures with the camera while we're here. It's such a dodgy thing. Question is if we glue these in, will they stay there, or will the forces cause this to break? It's going to try and break it even further than it's already done. So let's do as good a shot as I can from here. Sorry about this. Okay. This side is split as well. It's not quite as easy to see, but it's subject to exactly the same constraints, because it's the same thickness piece of timber. Yeah, what can we do? Yeah, that's a good shot. You can see loads of fresh air through there. Okay, well, that will kind of make the point clear enough. Yeah, I mean, really, that's all I can think of doing here is a build up of a piece of metal into here, resined into place. So it's just a solid lump, which hopefully will arrest any further movement canting outwards, which this is trying to do. And providing, just looking at the way I can shove these back in for a minute, but all things being equal, providing these things sit where I expect them to sit. Let's just check that now. I'm just going to look through the back and then make sure that this allows me to, or there's room. I've got to make sure there's room to put something in there. Probably could do with being tightened up for a moment. That's a perpetual weakness that I found with these 2-point trems. Okay, so I don't want to tie it down, I still need it to be able to move. Okay, there we have it. So again, this should be, ideally this will be all the way in. Difficult to get it to sit in just now. So, okay, so on the front there's absolutely, I don't know if you can see, but in this front bit here there's absolutely no obstruction at all with this operating. It never comes, it'll only tilt forward on its little thingies. That's its aim is to ride forward. It's not the smoothest thing in the world, I have to say. Let's have a look at it. Okay, so let's pull it forward. How does this little baby work? Is this even the right parts? That's what I'm wondering. So first of all, it's unusual to have a floating. I've not seen one of these. I see normally the knife edge is at the front of these things, so that the whole unit is pressing against the thing. So this must be designed to tilt on the front edge like this. So they have to be out far enough to allow us to get a fair lift here. So that's the range of movement, but obviously predominantly it goes from there back to there. So there's no constraints in its movement forward, which is good. So we've got room to try and strengthen that area up, but I'll need to ask Ryan first and foremost whether he wants me to do that, because it's a change. The alternative is just to glue these bushes in, stop them rising out because of they're rising out because the whole piece is split, obviously, and they've come loose. If we glue them in, what's going to happen? Well, the glue's going to come out through there. There's very little to grip to other than the front edge, so I think we'd be alright. But I do think we need to double up that back edge here with something, and I'll use one of my patented copper and resin constructions. So it's like a layer of resin, place the copper into the resin, and then resin over the copper, and then glue this in at the same time so the whole lot sets in place. Okay, well, that's that for the time being. That's one question to go and get solved. The other thing is, I'm just going to take this buzz fighting thing off, and hopefully it will be attached without any fuss, which it is. And there we have, yeah, so it's got a, wow, okay, it's actually, it's not, funny enough, it isn't actually curved on the front. It's pretty straight, but it's curved obviously following the slight radius of the guitar, but that needs to be cleaned up a bit, but I think we'll do just as well with a new one of these fellas, which will restore the scale length to exactly right. Okay, while we're at it, is there anything else I need to do? It's Wilkinson tuners, they're all in good shape, nothing wrong with those. Frets have a little bit of wear on them, but there's plenty of fret material so that when we come to do a setup, there's absolutely no reason that should present any problems at all. Just going to have a look in the electrics to see what we've got. Shouldn't be anything unusual, but we might as well give it a clean up while we're there. And I do want to get in and tighten up the jack socket, obviously, because that's a problem already. Now Ryan wanted this thing set in a floating configuration, and of course that's going to be a bit dependent on whether the floating, we'll have to make a judgment really on whether this thing actually has the strength to continue being used in a been manipulated. That's probably the biggest issue here. In fact, there's 3 splits in this whole piece. There's one at the back of each of these, and then there's one right down the centre of it, which again is not uncommon. So the whole piece is compromised, unfortunately. So my question would be, can this be strong enough to use it in anger, or have we really got to accept that the best we can hope for is to strengthen it, glue the things in so that we get the right action, and then keep it in a kind of locked down state? Because there is, I mean, that's really what, well, it's not only, I was going to say that's what kills them. The thing that knackers them is, I suppose it's threefold. I was just talking about 2 aspects. There is the downward, there's the pull of the strings this way, there's the pull of the springs that way, same direction, so they're both all pulling that way, but there's a pivot effect. So you've got the 2 things, and you've got a thing, springs pulling that way, which is pulling the posts, and then when you use it and you pull it back, it probably has pulled the posts out, which has created a taller pivot, which has probably stressed those points out even more. I can't quite work out which way the force is going to go, but just wanted to get a picture of this so you can see the other split in here. I can see it from up here. There you go. Right, it's quite simple in a way, just to get that decided. I suppose the thing that would make sense to do at this point would just have a look under here, because if we've got a split through to the other side, we'll see it. We should see it through the humbucker route. Let's have a quick look. The controls, by the way, these 2 units come in an interestingly sealed, like a black box sealed unit. So I'm not sure there's really much I can do to give it a clean. I might just blow it out with some air if that's even possible. But the thing, I don't know if you can see, just as a point of order, Ryan's got both of these end saddles down on the ground. There's a bit of a radius from the rest of them. They're nice solid things, but a bit of a radius on the rest, but they're at the limits of the outer ones, and then the rest sort of is a radius to follow suit. But they're down there because the saddle was standing up too tall, obviously. So let me try and get a close-up look. You can see that. You can see the line. But the timber on the inside of here is a bit sort of shaggy, so I'm not really able to get such a good look at the structure. Let's just try and poke a bit of light in there. It's not going to give up any secrets, I don't think. Maybe I'm just looking out for see if it spreads down here, but not unlikely, because that's nice and solid down there naturally. I think I can probably, I'm going to mark it actually, so I can just be sure of it. Where's the line? There it is. Okay. Yeah, this is a very vague kind of line going down there. There is a, sorry, dazzle. There is a split, so it's a split across here, split there. That was quite pronounced actually. You can hear both of those. So standard really. It's what happens with the 2-point tremolos. There isn't enough timber. There needs to be that much again on the other side to stand any chance of handling those forces, particularly if you're using it with a bar. So it's those 3 forces. It's the pulling in the same direction from both sides around the pivot points, but then it's the physical handling of it too, which is pushing it. Well, if you're pulling it back, it's pulling it back this way, levering those posts. If you let go, it's ramming it forward that way. So tricky. I'll just give these a little clean while I'm at it. So I'm going to put this on hold, and I think I better send Ryan an email to see what he's thinking of. But I mean, in a way, the good thing is that a little quote unquote strengthening fix. It's not really that precise. It's just a bit of brute solid material to hopefully buttress up the weak spot. And obviously it's out of view, so you won't really see it. I mean, it could be another piece of timber, but in a way there's not really much point using a soft material, relatively brittle or soft material like timber, when actually we'll just be putting some steel. I don't have any steel plate. Well, I might find a piece of steel plate which will do the job just as well. Yeah, that's a nice little bit of a clean up beneath the edges of things. Yeah, so it might well be a little piece of steel, but the same principle is going to apply. It's got to bed it into some material that's going to hold that all solid, and it could conceivably come out towards the lip of this and still do its job. So we've got some leeway with that. No point having this off now. It's just gonna, I can't really clean it that well. Truth is, I could clean it better. What is this pickup? Does it say? No, it's quite a chunky old thing. That could do while we're at it. So I could take this off and give this at least the ring a good clean. Actually, that's going to be hard to handle without dropping that. So put this baby in. But yeah, it's a mucky old thing, but common damage. So in a way, what you've got is the reason that those bushes are rising up, and it kind of answers the question, why would they do that? Well, they're doing it because they've been weakened and stretched. And how have they been weakened and stretched? Well, they've split, and that's then increased or released its grip on the actual released its grip on the posts. Hence, they can rise up and out. And then the question is, why have they done that? Well, it's because the wood is cracked, good and proper. So somewhere, oh, come on, there's a little bit of the old chrome cleaner. While we're here, why not indeed? It may not totally clean it up, but we can give it a go. Yeah. So it's always interesting things you find when you take things apart a little bit, and then you have to track back and figure out what it was that caused what as best you can. Of course, you can't always figure it out, but sometimes the common sense or the logic will lead you to some place. I think that's probably the case here. But I've seen it loads of times. Too many guitars, and I probably haven't said it enough times, but if you're going to buy a guitar with a 2-point floating trem, if you're buying it via eBay, you're taking a big risk, because it's such a common area of damage. And if you can twist the seller's arm so that they will take it apart and photograph it so you can see for yourself there are no cracks, then that's very good. I mean, particularly if it's an expensive one, you probably stand a chance of the seller doing that if they actually want the sale. But if it's a cheapie, then you may find yourself just taking a potluck. And if it's broken, I've had some where it's, for example, on some Squire standard strats, if it's really split, then you don't have a lot you can do with it. Or, for example, like I mentioned, Matthias's guitar, that was so badly split that the pieces of wood had come away, and they had split in half, and the two halves of the bushing surround had just was floating around inside the body. So my advice would be, if it's an expensive guitar, or like for example a genuine Fender or something like that, and it's got a 2-point trem, regardless of the age, get them to show you. Take the bridge out. If somebody's charging you maybe 500 or 600 quid, then they should be willing to do that. But in a way, if you do get it, it's gonna, if you're buying and selling, it's potentially going to render your sale kind of impossible, unless you're going to be honest about it, in which case it'll cap the price you can charge, as has happened to me in the past. I'm never going to be somebody who doesn't say about it. Even if I get caught out, I'm not going to pass it on to someone else. But you know, the problem that you've got is you'll lose the value will just disappear on the guitar. It's got cat fur everywhere, so I'm just give it a bit of blowing out with some air. I don't know if you can see there, it's sort of a black box with the 2 barrel switches in it. Not really any room to get anywhere with anything, so I'm just going to shoot whatever contact cleaner I can around the place a little bit, and then blow the excess out of the way. Okay, we can give that block a clean up, but as I say, the real big question is, let's go and talk to Ryan and see if we can agree on stabilising this chunk of wood. Oh, also let's just find a black selector tip for this thing while we're at it. I've got 2 that might fit, might being the operative word, in black, and then the rest are white and cream, which is a bit weird. Okay, I think this is going to be the only one. These are new tips. Okay, that will fit with a bit of what's the word? Extra padding on it. This one's going to be too big. This is an old style, 70s style beastie. Alternative would be a bit of a odd looking white one, but it's probably a better fit in terms of the piece. But yeah, none of it's going to stay on, so let's go with the black one and a bit of filler tape. We can use double-sided sticky tape to give that the best chance of staying on board. Boring stuff. Anyway, right, what I shall do for your sanity and mine is I would like to have broken this off. Pliers. Thank you. Thin bit of double-sided. They need about half of that, I think. It's difficult to get the tape off, but not impossible. Difficult, but not impossible. I say difficult, but not impossible. Now, come on. Right. Okay. Come on. There we go. Thanking you so much. Right. This is not the best solution in the universe, but it'll do for the sake of holding a piece on like this. Wiggle, wiggle, waggle. Right, stay on. Let it stay on. Don't want to glue it. That'll stay on for now. Okay. Right, stop the video. Let's go and check up on our solution. Meanwhile, I'll find a piece of copper or steel that will do the job behind here. See what we can do. Alright, back to you in a minute. As just a quick thing, I just chopped a spare piece of steel I had down to size, so the idea is that this would sit perfectly behind here. It's the exact right thickness, right size. I don't know if you can see. Right, there we are. It would sit in there and get lacquered into place, and resined into place, so that it would form a kind of solid wall. I'm just looking to see whether it's actually even possible to screw it into place, but I don't think it would be, because there's just a risk of weakening anything else. No, there isn't a risk. We could screw it in the middle there. There's solid material, but I don't want to really. I think I just want something solid holding it in place. Lacquer resin would do. But let's check with Ryan and see what he says. Ow, spinning around on the flying camera. Well, look, here we are. Well, the plate is resined in place, locked down in the corners, and actually it's stuck to the wood, but it's more filled in the corners. So as you can see, it's not visible, but it will strengthen that area there, and the tremolo will sit happily on top of that. So I am going to place this here like this. Oh, sorry. And I'm going to, whoops, you can't see anything for a minute. Sorry, my mistake. Oops. There we go. I'm going to leave that propped up there like that for the night, and then tomorrow it will have set and we'll carry on. And the glue on these bushes will have also set. So they're going to stay where they belong, which is in there, and that's strengthened them. So we should get a floating tremolo out of that. In the meantime, back in the house, I've got the neck, and I'm just doing filling a couple of big dents on the neck so that they don't get in the way, because you can really feel them when you're playing. So that's going to stay there overnight, and that's the lot for tonight. And then we'll carry on tomorrow and get it done. And one of these days this place needs a spring clean, because it's an absolute mess. But look at this low humidity. Look at that, 51%. Now I could be spraying stuff. 15 degrees because the heating was on. But it's a really good low. And I'm probably zapping you with my phone blooping thing, but sorry about that. I've got some things to do with getting some more oak casters done at some point, but I need to get this underway, get Ryan's thing done, and then we'll be good to go on the oak casters. So I'll see you tomorrow. Good morning, welcome to the Relove Guitars workshop, and here we have neck back on, some lacquer repairs done and drying. I'll sand those and polish those out later. So I've basically filled some holes in the back so that we'll end up with a smooth finish. Tremolo back in place with its kind of holding plate there as well. Now in that there is, I'm going to get the tremolo arm out, but not just yet, because what I want to do really is just to get ready to make this thing play. Well, no, actually I've got to set it up. So I need some, I never remember where I've put strings that fit. I'm going to need a set of strings. So this goes, is this a through body? Yeah, of course it's a through body. Yeah, it's a strat style. So I need long enough strings to do this, and I'm never quite sure if I've got a long enough set. So I'm going to put those there. Those are going to be sacrificial strings. What do I need? Oh yeah, I need a nut. I need to put a nut on here. So got a busy day today. I've got this guitar to do, and I've got the Carina V to finish, because it's been sitting around a while waiting to get done. So I'm just going to tidy up this nut slot and give it a bit of a clean if I can. So I'm going to put in. Sorry, I put the camera back to a 170-degree angle, mainly because that's what I had it on the other night when I played a gig. So sort of just ended up defaulting to that, but it's, in a way, I know it's a little bit disconcerting for some people who don't like the curvy camera angle, but or the curvy neck on the guitar that it appears, but it's a better angle in many ways for showing what's going on. Excuse me, because I don't have to worry about moving it and adjusting it, because it's kind of, it gets everything in. I noticed with the other camera angle that quite often, I know it's no great loss, but quite often I was invisible or not in the shot, and I know that's absolutely great for most of you, but it just looked a little bit disembodied at times, so I just think it's probably a slightly better thing having the wider angle. Anyway, I'm just looking at this. I want to get this to fit in here, and it's pretty much there already. Just need to make sure that's a flat bottomed slot. And I'll use a blade actually. So overnight, while I was, or after I finished in here yesterday, what I did was I took the neck in to the house, and over a few hours I just added layer after layer to these lacquer dings on the other side, and it's not a big deal, it's not a huge repair or anything, it just fills in these two quite deep gouges. And so when I polish it out or sand it out lightly later on, it's just going to feel a much nicer overall playing experience, because you won't have that niggling, annoying thing getting, you know, because your hands are very sensitive, or your fingers are very sensitive and can very quickly feel what's going on. So having smoothed those out will be an improvement. I'm just going to take a tiny bit of kind of thickness off this if I can. And then we just fit it right in that little slot, and it will sit down nicely where it should. Okay. So as you saw yesterday, I took off the buzz phyton nut, and it's not done in any umbrage. Is that the right word? Umbrage? Yeah, I've not. I'm not quite convinced about its efficacy, but that doesn't mean I know better. It just means I'm not quite convinced about its efficacy. So with that kind of in mind, and knowing that the way I do this anyway is going to be takes care of the potentially sharp notes at the early frets, then I don't feel I need to worry about that, or employ such thing as a specially compensated nut for the purpose of fixing it. Now that doesn't mean it doesn't work, and possibly if you aren't the kind of person, as I am, who makes a big deal of very low first fret action, then it may well be that the buzz phyton thing is a really good move, and it will take care, possibly, I'm sure it will. I doubt they would have developed it or marketed it without having some clear idea that it does what they hope it does to cure those sharp notes at that part of the neck. But like I said, for me it doesn't feel necessary, and the reason I took it off is because if I really have a method that, as far as I'm concerned, pretty well takes care of those issues, then I don't really want to go adding another level of fix to what isn't a problem by that time, if you see what I mean. So I suspect putting it simply, I suspect the buzz phyton system would probably cause problems given the kind of low first fret action that I set. So it probably doesn't make sense at all for me to use it. Now what I'm doing right now is I'm just loading some sacrificial strings into this thing so that I can get ready to do the fret leveling on this, and I just want to gently press down on the nut. But also, while I'm doing this, it gives me a bit of a view into what my action is like the other end. Now I suspect I know I would struggle to get this fed through, so as I've got hundreds of spare top E's, I'm going to ditch this and go with an easy new one. Might as well, it's going to save me a lot of grief. So I'll just pull them straight off the shelf. Thanks to rotor sound. I can see the action here is miles high at the moment, but that's okay, we'll take care of that. It's funny, I've often started off, I've sometimes thought about cutting down the nut before I put it on, and for me it's something feels much more controlled to cut down from the top, even though it in some ways takes a little bit longer. I prefer to do that than to sort of start guessing or trying to measure an amount to take off and work, from the bottom upwards, so that we're kind of in a good position to start with. So I'll work this down, and if necessary I'll cut a groove or a slot, a V slot, before I get to the precision bits. Whoops, come on now, round you go. Well, round you go the right way, Pratt. Thank you. So these are only sacrificial, so I don't have to worry too much about them. Right, there's a lovely summer's day. No, it's not summer at all, it's a spring day, early spring day going on out there. So everything's looking good alignment wise. The bridge is sitting back in its thing. I've placed it in such a way that I'm going to go with a setup with the tremolo hopefully touching the back, and then what I'll do is, once I've done that, I'm going to lift it up and set it, and what will change will be the action, but the levelness, the relative levelness of the frets will stay the same, and will be under the same string tension. Just that once the tremolo is set in a floating position, it will just be in a different configuration, but none of the crucial factors will change. Now, just looking at this now, when I get down to the correct action, we've got a little bit of, I'm going to go up a little bit. Now I've got these two strings on, just going to put them under a little bit of tension. I'll put the thingy, capo on just for a second, just to kind of squish these down to give me an idea of the action. So what I'll be looking for now is, I can do it one of two ways. I can either raise the action here on the individual saddles, which gives me just close to 1 millimetre around about there, which isn't excessively high or anything, so I can go with that, and then obviously I'd need to make sure that the next saddles had a corresponding lift as we went through the sequence, but I'll tailor that a bit more closely as when the time comes, when I've got the strings on. But in principle, that's just giving myself a sort of look at whether I want to make those adjustments by using these saddles, or whether I'd be happier lifting the whole plate up a little bit using the pivot screws here. But I think I quite like standing these up. It looks good to me. The angle isn't too great. If the angle was too great, I'd probably go with raising the plate a little bit. But I think that feels about right for now. I'll start with that, and then just tweak it a little bit and raise these to kind of map the curve. Again, like I said, it's a bit sort of eyeballing it right this second, and we'll come down to the precision and stuff a bit later on. But it's a combination between, you can use both the two pivots, the pivoting screws at the end, to raise it a little bit, and I might just do that. I'll see how it feels in a minute, but I'll start with the saddles there like that, and if necessary I'll raise the front part out, pivoting it out. But once it's up, obviously what's going to happen as soon as the back end, as soon as we get the tremolo into floating position, this whole action is going to come up anyway, so I will come down. So this is just, it's not an exact science, it's a sort of kind of knowing what's going to happen next science. So this is the highest these are going to be set. When I've got it floating, I'm going to need to lower them down to restore the action, but I'm starting off with, can I get a good playing action out of the saddles as they are, which I can. So I'm going to carry on with that as my start point, and then see what we get. Difficulty, of course, or a challenge here, is getting these strings back through. I think, just looking at this, I think this might be a 10 set, and I'm going to go with hybrid 9, so I think they might be just a tiny fraction different, but let's see. Got just about enough room to get to the tuning posts. Now, for now, we're a bit short we are a bit short on strings, aren't we? I think, right, if I'm being 25, this is so that's a shortish scale, so this really this should be 10, shouldn't it? Yeah, I'm going to go, let's I'm short of strings. I think I'm short of strings. I've got 3 left over. So yeah, no, I've got enough. Right, so it is 10s I'm going for, so these are a 10s set, which is fine. Okay, let's just get that clear in my head. This is a shorter scale guitar, 25 inches, slightly shorter scale, so I'm going to stick with these 10s, otherwise I think 9s would be a bit on the bendy side. These will be good for sacrificial strings, and then I've got a new set of 10s there waiting. Yeah, so the kind of setting of the bridge at this point, so what I'll end up doing is to make sure this doesn't come forward. I don't want it to come forward into floating mode yet. So to avoid that, I'm going to tighten it down using the tremolo screws in a second. I won't do it if I don't need to. If it doesn't come forward when I tune these up, then that's fine, but if it does, then I'll make sure it's flattened at the back under tension. Now that will put our repairs under tension as well, so probably a good thing, because we're going to need to know whether or not that works effectively. If it just collapses on first go, then we know that we're going to have to lock this tremolo down permanently and block it off to reduce it as much as possible, the forces on it, because that splitting of the wood, the housing wood around the two bushings or mountings is in pretty significant damage. So okay, so I guess what I'll do is I'll just get tuning out of here, and we'll see how close we can get without the whole thing falling to bits. Now we don't have, this guitar came without strings on it, so we don't have any reference point in terms of, there wasn't any original relief set in the neck to refer to, so we're going to obviously have to do that from scratch and set it the way, or check it and set it the way we want. The point of the sacrificial strings at this point, I'm just checking that it's seated correctly. It's a little bit overhanging, but it's only overhanging insofar as I wanted to make sure it lines up exactly in the optimum position. Sometimes the nut tries to kick the bass string a little further in, which would leave you a bit shorter on the treble on the top E, which I don't like. I'd much rather they were equal down, right down the neck. Now this feels quite ridiculous at the moment. Okay, it's starting to move. Starting to move the tremolo just slightly. That's because it's way out. So it feels, the whole action thing feels ridiculous at the moment because there's no, the first fret is way too high. So what I'm going to do is not with this screwdriver, with this one I'm going to screw in the claw. The claw! We haven't got that many springs on here, so I'm going to start with the claw. In fact, I'm going to put the claw quite a long way in because I'm going to need it for that, in that position when the time comes to set it up as floating. So I'm going to put it under quite a lot of tension right now, and again we'll see if anything pops out of there, any of the bits pop out of their holes. I also just want this to be kind of equally lowered at this point in time before we go anywhere. That looks looks about right. And again, I'll just double check the tuning because that will have slightly affected that. Okay, so there's my there's my basic strung tension. What I'm going to do is, obviously I'm going to take down the slots at this end, so I'm going to do a couple of things. I guess I'll do it slightly different order. I'm going to check the relief in the neck first, which is going to be the same however high these things are, because it's basically about it's all about how hard the strings are pulling the neck versus the counteracting truss rod. So I'm just going to clamp the first fret and just I'm basically assessing the gap here, the amount of curvature, and actually it's a little bit, a tiny bit non-existent on the treble side. Yeah, hardly any, and I mean similarly little, but a tiny bit more on the bass side. Sometimes it's uneven. So personally, I would like to take a little bit off that. That's right, yeah, just increase that slightly. So I need my Allen thing, and then what I'll do is, if presuming this is the right one, let's have just a quick look. Maybe slightly not the right one. The aim will be to just slacken it off ever so slightly, and it'll be, it's a British made one, but for some reason it looks like it's going to be an imperial setting, because it doesn't seem to fit the what I've got there as the millimetre ones, metric ones. Let's have a look. little bit difficult to line it up when you've got the strings in the way, but I'm not sure. I ain't sure about this. We need to move these to one side to get a bit of a better feel of things. Not too big. That was too big, that was too small. Let's try an in-between one. Or I think it's possibly the same. Oh, okay, that's it. Alright, there's a little bit of release going on there. We'll see if that has any effect. It's not exactly tight anyway at that point, the truss rod, so we may be at the full extent of its slackenings, what that might, meaning that might be the only maximum curve we've got. That's a tiny bit better actually. Good, leave it there, see what it does over the next few minutes. Nothing springing out of there just yet, nothing flying out the back here. Just FYI, what I did was, in case Ryan wanted to block this off, if these bushings in here really are too weak to do anything, if they break, because potentially they could, and then the posts come out altogether. But if they start show signs of giving way, then you take the springs off and you put a block behind there to stop the thing, and it reduces the amount of force pulling in that direction. There's still the string tension pulling, but it would be kind of mostly held by the block. But if you do take the springs off there, what happens is you no longer have a grounding to the block. So what I did was, while I was there, I put a wire in down one of the bushings, which actually happened to come out through a convenient hole in the plate. So what I'll do is I'm just going to double that up to this thing here, so that even if you take the springs off, you've actually got a jumper extra earth wire that goes to the bridge. So it will be earthed even if you come to the point, or come to the decision, that you've got to take some of the load off this because the repair isn't holding, or the damage is too great. Okay, so I'm going to live with the amount of relief we've got in there. So that's the first thing. The next thing, sometimes I do this action down here first, and I could do it, providing if I want to do it, because I know I've got such a high action here at the moment, then I'd probably make a lot more sense just to capo that off and work the action from here, because if I leave it up, it's obviously going to give me a false reading. Now this is supposed to be renowned shredder type guitar, so we should be able to do a really low action. Currently it's 1.2 and about the same, 1.2, 1.2. So just to be on the kind of safe side, I'm going to go fractionally up, so we're not pushing it to the ridiculous extreme. Sorry, camera angle. So we go. It's comfortable on the 1.5, just under 1.5. That's just over, so this is going to come down. Down a bit more. And it's got to follow the radius, but it's also, we also need to bring it down to and a continuum down to the one at the top end. So that feels about right at the moment. And I'll just get it another quick tuning. Right, there's my relief set, my bridge action set for the time being, which will change when the thing comes up, but we want it now for a low action to do the fret leveling, so we're treating it as if it was the action we're going to play with. Now the next stage is a nice slow process of working the slots down. It's going to be quite high, or the nut is quite high, so I'm going to need to be patient and careful with this. I'm going to pick a set that's oversized, as always. You know, my logic or my rationale for that is even when I go oversized, like so for a 10 gauge I'm going 13, for a 13 I'm going 17, for a 17 I'm going 24, and so on and so on. Even when I go oversized like this, I still have to do some filing, sandpapering, sorry, to make the things play without binding. So it's partly because I think it's partly because obviously a nut is relatively thick, so there's quite a lot of wiggle room as it transits, as the strings transit through the nut. So there's plenty of opportunities to catch, even if you've got the actual gap seems to be the right size. I'm saying that, but technically it shouldn't be the case. But I've just found that if you do it to the exact gauge, 36 to 42 and 46 to 48, if you do it to the exact gauge, you will end up with pinging, sticking strings, and you'll end up having to work it with sandpaper anyway. So it's kind of inevitable that you have to do that. So I found that to minimize it, there's a sort of 3,000ths roughly is a workable increased figure that I work with to get these right, and then it leaves me with precious little, hopefully a small amount of adjustment afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to go with the 0.3 target action. There's quite a lot to take down here, so I'm just going to take off these two strings for now, and I'm going to work with this. Now, having done this, having said there's a lot to take down, I'm going to begin with the jeweler's file. Are you still on there? Yeah, you are on. Yep. I'm going to start with the jeweler's file in this kind of arrangement. It's going to make a lot of bone and dust everywhere, but we'll get there. So the idea will be just to come down to begin with to a close, workable sort of height, and doing it in a way that leaves a V notch most of the way down, because that's not going to grip and choke the strings off. So I can just round out or shape out the bottom of the slot with the correct nut file. In my ebook it goes into how to finish the whole thing off practically just using this file. In fact, what I could do is, rather than switch over now, I could go through all of the strings and just get them all down to close to the working height. And what I'll do after that is I'll go over, once we've done the settings, then I'll go over and take off the excess material on the top once the strings are off and we've done the fret leveling, because we don't need anything above the string seating position. So you get quite a nice low profile nut out of it in the end. You don't need this huge wodge of bone at the end of your neck. Okay, so I'm close to the point there. I'm going to just put this one back in and do the same here, and I'll do all of them this way first and then go ahead and fine-tune them afterwards. So you can see it's pretty crude work at the moment, just taking it down, checking visually. Don't really have to work with the feeler gauge just yet because we're sort of pretty crude strokes. And then, like I say, I'll use the nut files to just do the last few tenths of a millimetre, I suppose it would be. Other people, may much prefer to work from the bottom up, and in other words, calculate the correct amount with the, how much fret you've got, how much height of nut, and so on, and you could probably work out to shave close to the amount you need to remove from the underside before you put it on the guitar. Me, it's a personal preference, I prefer to work downwards, taking away as I go, rather than try and take a whole load off in one go. And also, yeah, it feels, so I think it's just a preference, that's all. You could do it whichever way. If you're scientific and very good with your measuring, you could probably take away almost exactly the right amount to begin with. A little bit more. You can see right now that the slots are going to be quite deep, but we can take that down as we go through. Okay, and as I said, you know, the purpose of cutting this with the jeweler's file right now is just to ensure that when we come to doing the finer tunings, the last bit, then we're doing it with clear slot so that the nut files don't stick in the last bit. There are other things you could use for this, which will do a similar thing. For example, if you wanted to, you could use, which is the bigger actually. There's some pretty chunky ones here that I bought for a base set. They're not exactly high tech, but you could take something like this orange one, which is, I don't know, it's just numbered. It doesn't really have any accurate thing, but you could work with that down to a, you know, square bottomed slot, and then you can just carry on with your correct nut files at the end. I use the V shape just because it's pretty much guaranteed to give you clearance without binding all the way down to whatever level you stop at with it. So I quite like the reassurance of that, or the dependability of it, I should say. And then I'll Dremel all the excess off in a little bit later when we've done the fret leveling. Now I'm saying fret leveling, I'm assuming that this guitar will need it. It isn't always the case. It's not always the case, and if this thing will play at the action I've set, then that's great. You know, I save myself a couple of hours of work and a few quid for Ryan in the process, so it's always a bonus for everyone concerned. But it's not that common. You know, as you may have seen from my videos, that almost every guitar that I've had through here requires some form of fret leveling to get to the really low actions. Probably more than anything, just because of the fact that, you know, fretting is not an exact science at the level of precision that we're dealing with these kinds of first fret clearances, and clearances all the way up the neck. So, you know, it's I think when you get into doing this, the thing you have to get your head around is that on a nice low action, the clearances are incredibly small, period. So what it means is the tiniest of moves in one direction or another either take you over or under. You know, you can be overcooked or undercooked pretty easily. But because at a low action the tolerances or clearances are so tiny, tiny variations make a big deal, and equally tiny variations in evenness of the frets makes a big deal as well. So that, you know, at a high action, which is where most people settle, you're kind of effectively clear of the inherent fret unevenness, which doesn't have to be great. As I say, the tighter the tolerances or the smaller the clearances, the less it takes in terms of unevenness to choke the notes. The lower the action, therefore, the tighter, the smaller the clearances. well, we're getting close to a good action already, and it feels already quite playable. So my aim is to get these down to the correct height, and then we'll check for playability. And to be honest, if we get it down, the action that we want, and it's playable, the only thing that would suggest doing any kind of fret leveling anyway is that these frets have been leveled in the past by the look of it, but they haven't been recrowned to the shape. So it may well be that we've got the required levelness, but we'll see. I don't know. Well, I think it's probably worth recrowning them even if they are level, and that way we get to repolish them anyway and kind of bring them back to a kind of new condition, almost new condition. So that's what I do, even if they happen to be level. Although I'm not sure when we get down to the final action, I'm not sure if they will actually be level. So now I'm at the stage where I'm going to work with the files, and obviously I'm going to be down at the bottom of these slots now. So I'm going to start with my D string and just always go with a visual look at the gap to begin with my feeler gauge, and then I'm going to work with the file. And the idea is just to gently go backwards in the slot 10 degrees or so, a little bit of cutting, try it out, check the gap, and that's all it is really. Keep going a bit more. Now if it goes too far, if the original notch isn't really deep enough, what we'll get is the file will start getting caught up in the slot a little bit, and then we might need to go down a bit further with the B file just to clear a bit of space to be working. But it's feeling quite free running at the moment, and obviously using that nut file now means that the shape at the bottom of the slot is going to be the correct shape, which is why the nut files can be very useful. In my ebook, and it shows how to do it with just the V notch file, I still recommend that you bottom out the slot with either a piece of old string of the correct gauge or a welding nozzle cleaner, which is quite, there you go, we're right on the mark there. A welding nozzle cleaner, which is quite a common thing that guitarists like to use. Sort of poor man's nut files, but you know, really inexpensive by comparison, so a good option actually. Okay, so that's the first one done. That's the D done. D done. D done. Now I can see visually that the A is miles off, so I'm just going to get cracking with that using the chosen A. You can see it cutting quite nicely. I've had these files now for a year or two easily, and they're still going strong. Some of the bigger ones, like the 48 that I'm going to use in a minute, sort of starting to wear out. But the truth is, if you're using, they've kind of, on these files, they tend to have a clean bit here, with no blade, a kind of holding bit. So you tend to work at this end here, which tends to wear these bits out eventually. And actually, what you can do, if it's absolutely necessary, you could basically grind this off or saw this off and use a shorter section, because you tend not to use these bits. These stay fresh and you've got a lot of life down here, but the reason you don't use it down here is at an angle with this sticking out bit, you're liable to hit the lacquer of the headstock. So either, if you want to use the whole thing and you wear it out here, you can either cut this handle bit off and just, you know, nobody's going to hurt themselves touching the blade on this, they're not that sharp, but you know, cut off the excessive, the unusable, useless bit, and then just use the relatively unused part. So there's a lot, I guess what I'm saying is, a lot more life in them than at first it seems when they start to look like they're wearing out. They're also quite a tricky thing to handle. They behave, the different sizes behave differently, and they can, you really can't treat them the same. You can see this one's not struggling exactly, but it's having a bit more trouble getting through because it's now starting to go, the slot is starting to get deep enough just to start to catch. And if I can't get it running smoothly, then I will probably need to just work it a little bit extra now with the V again. But again, I've got to be very careful here that I don't overcut too quickly. My aim is just to free up that extra bit of space. Okay, and making sure I've got the freedom of free movement. Free movement of nut files. There we go. And it just is a case of slowly but surely. And once in a while, you will overcut the nut. Now, when I aim for a 0.3 of a millimeter over the first fret, I'm aiming for 0.3 with the guitar on its back and the neck supported here. In reality, although that's fairly neutral, it will open up just slightly when I put it up here. So what I measured as 0.3 is probably just a fraction higher than 0.3, which means, let's call it 0.35. It means you've got a fair bit of room in case you overcut. I mean, you tend not to overcut by miles, but if you do, you might go down to 0.25 or something, and you can say, well, okay, I'll take all of them down to 0.25 if I need to, or I'll just leave that one. If you overcut a long way, then you're in a sort of position where you can you have a number of choices. Worst comes to the worst, you can knock off that nut and start again. And if you buy your bone nut in China, where I do, it's only a couple of quid per nut, if that. You get very reasonable price Chinese nuts. But that's, there we go, we're right on the mark. That would only be in the case that it's just totally unsavable. Yeah, that's in the case that it's completely unsavable. It's very rare that happens. If you overcut slightly, you can either knock the nut off, shim it with a very fine shim, put it back on, and you've gained yourself the height to come back down again. Or you can fill the overcut with a little bit of bone dust and super glue, which forms a hard cement, which you can then work on again and keep going until you're at the correct depth again. So you've got quite a lot of options, but you know, the most extreme, the replacing it and starting again, should only cost you a couple of pounds if you think in advance and buy a few spare nuts. If you do this on, if you've got a couple of guitars, or you're going to do it more than once in your life, so get some spares in, and for a small amount of money you've got the peace of mind that you can experiment and learn through doing, knowing that you can really mess it up and replace it without any major problem. So that's what my advice would be, is get some spares in from China, because they're cheap as chips, bone chips. So I'm working this low E down to the required, slightly different because the E sort of tends to hang off, the fret rounds off at the end here, so you've got to sort of look at it in conjunction with the other strings. You don't want to tip the file off the end, the gauge off the end, because you get a slightly false reading. The whole point, by the way, about bringing these up to pitch is not, it's not for the sake of tuning, it's just when you cut these, if you don't have the string at close to pitch, sometimes it can get stuck halfway up the cut, and you'll look at it and you say, oh look, I've got more to go, and you'll keep on cutting it. And what you won't realise is that as soon as you put it under full tension, it overcomes the resistance where it's stuck halfway down the side, and it pops all the way down to the bottom, and suddenly you're way overcut. And it can happen very easily. And I've had it happen loads of times. So always have this at tension for that reason. It's the only way it's going to make sure it sits properly in the slot. Again, if you didn't have it at tension, and then when you put it under tension it pops right down to the bottom and you overcut, then you go into the possible remedial options, the fill with bone dust and super glue, which actually can be bicarbonate of soda. That's quite good. I'm going to stop there. It can be bicarb and superglue, which is a good cement mixture, or it can be bone. So I keep on tuning to make sure my tension is right. So I've got the bottom 3 strings just where I want them, which is great. Moving to the top 3, working from the G outwards, what I know is that these cut differently, so I'm going to need to be kind of reset my brain and work on these afresh. And they also, because they're thinner, these tend to cut quicker, and they're much more likely to overcut on these high strings than you are on the lower strings. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen here, in my experience. Right, coming close to the mark. Don't want to go any further with that. So you can see how long it's taking. The question, I guess anyone with it, who plays a lot of guitar will be asking is, well, can the factory do this automatically? Is it possible to tailor or get your production process to be accurate enough to not need to do this sort of work? And you'd think technically it is, and the reason I would say that is because if you think of an Ibanez with a locking nut system, one of those lovely, I don't know what, the edge tremolo systems and locking nuts and so on, that locking nut fixes the first fret action at the factory. There's no real adjustment you can make to it unless you take it out and actually grind down or sand down the underside of the... I'm going to stop right there, that's really good. Yeah, unless you take out the metal part of the nut and carefully sand it down, or lap it, or whatever people would call it in the engineering world. But so you can adjust it, but Ibanez tend to have it obviously pre-ready adjusted. So, and they're placing that piece of metal on top of a piece of timber that's cut, and it's very accurate. So that can be done. I guess people, I don't know why, with a plastic or a bone nut, for some reason the manufacturers don't seem to go at the problem with the same kind of precision. And you can see that it is important, because some manufacturers like Gibson kind of ended up having to try and take it on board by making their adjustable brass nut contraption, which is a great idea. I haven't had one, but a couple of people have told me that there are even problems with that. I think something to do with it wearing out or something. But in principle it's a good idea. It gives you the ability to quickly do what I'm doing here. And in fact the device I bought just the other day from China, the headless guitar piece that I bought the other day, has a different, actually quite different from the Gibson one, but it has an adjustable, it's chromed metal by the looks of it, so I have no idea what's really under there, probably copper or something, but it has an adjustable nut here, which is actually a really good idea. So I'm aiming to set it so it's sitting at its lowest, and then I can just raise it, because I know that more than anything it's going to come up. It needs to start low by default, but it's a really cute little system, so I'm looking forward to using that. But that's done on the basis that the maker knows that adjusting the nut slot to the right height to get the correct first fret action is really, really important. And it's kind of good to see that it's recognized how important it is. But then you go back to thinking of guitars that are produced basically with plastic, or at best bone and sometimes tusk nuts, and you look at them hanging on the wall in the guitar shop, and you know that nobody's spent this amount of time getting that action optimal. I mean, correct isn't the right word, there's no set thing, it's preference. I only set it to what I know from experience produces a certain kind of action that I like. But what I'm doing is, whatever the measurement is, I'm spending time getting all of the slots to the same, hopefully optimal playing action over the first fret. And you can see that many a guitar you pull off the wall in the shop, it hasn't had that attention given to it, and so that the nut is kind of the crudest part in some ways. You know, you've got these precise frets that are positioned, you know, mathematically, and I'm stopping there with that one. And then you've got a nut that's this big gloopy lump of plastic that's just been thrown on, really. Gives you a tiring first fret action, but also one that causes these intonation issues or tuning issues, whichever you want to describe it as. But you know, and it can, given the importance of a guitar playing and staying in tune to the whole point of playing guitar, then I've seen, you know, Gibsons with all their pedigree and quality, and I've seen many of them totally ruined by slapdash lack of attention to the first fret action, i.e. virtue of the plastic, or not plastic, but bone nut shoved on the end quite crudely. So, and I know that, you know, the so-called, I haven't seen it in actual action, but the so-called Plek machine is supposed to get all of this sort of optimized, and the only couple of guitars I've actually seen that somebody said they assured me have gone through that machine didn't really show evidence of level frets, so I don't know what the machine exactly did, but I could be wrong. I mean, as I know from experience, the frets don't have to be level to some arbitrary absolute levelness. They only have to be level enough to make the chosen action play, which is why I start from a low chosen action, and then you've got a range of adjustment anywhere down to that action from anywhere upwards that you prefer, but you have the option to go nice and low. So this is taking a while to get there. Get nervous at this point. I just want to widen that a fraction, and then we'll take a tiny bit more for the last bit. So what happens is sometimes it starts to just seem like it's not doing anything, and then you can run the risk of overcutting, but that is perfect. I'm stopping there. Hurrah! Okay, I'll take a note off here. One more tuning. Wow! That is a blindingly low action. It's just incredible. If I may say so myself, as I will, I make no apologies for it, that really is pucker low. I mean, you probably can see it, but now the thing I've just got to check now, as I mentioned before, I've decided that I think it's probably, given the fact that these appear not to, they've been levelled by the looks of it, but not recrowned or reshaped, so I think it's probably worthwhile doing that. If this plays all the way, I was going to say, if it plays all the way up at my chosen low action to begin with, then the chances are I might get away without fret levelling. But having said that, there are bits of, that's not bad. I'm going to, just a tiny bit, since I'm going to crown it anyway, I'm going to do we'll do a tiny bit of fret leveling on this, but very, very light. So I'm going to just flop off the strings for a second, and then I'll mark up the fingerboard, and then get out my fret leveling tools, just put that on the edge of the fingerboard. Again, these sacrificial strings really just have to last long enough to do these couple of jobs, and then I can bin them. I put the heating on for a little short while, but having been on now, it's stored some warmth at the top of this shed at the moment, so I'm just gonna, I need to go out and cool off in a minute, because the sun's come out on the top of the shed. Even though it's only spring sunshine, it's still nice. Right, for the fret leveling, very light fret leveling, but just enough, and we might as well, since we're going to do the re-profiling anyway. So even though technically it's just about playing at that really, really low action, you know, and having stressed it is a very low action, which is what I always tend to aim for. First of all, is a sort of, it's like a challenge to the fretboard. You know, can we make it play at the lowest possible action? And if we can, then we've got a nice range upwards. If it doesn't suit you to play really, really low, then we can go upwards any amount, which is a luxury. We can go up and down. But my experience is that most people like it to be as low as is humanly possible. So there are my frets coloured in. I'm going to just get it back to pitch, bearing in mind that it will have kind of slacked off a little bit around the posts, so it might need a couple of tugs. But so as you know, I'm going to level this with the tremolo in a sort of lockdown position, because basically what we're saying is we're making the guitar fretboard play with this 1.5mm action. A little bit more pulling. Again, it's the absolute tuning isn't the most critical thing. We're not recording a track here. What we want is for the neck to be under pretty much the same load as playing. Okay, there is our neck ready to go. Now, what I'm going to use is a thin truss rod for this operation, because now this is quite funny because I didn't double check. Ryan had said that this is a compound fretboard. I'm not sure it is. The advertising I've seen says it's a 12-inch radius, but either which way, it's not a problem for this tool, because this tool respects whatever radius it encounters at either end of the thing, so it really doesn't matter. And I guess I could draw a little diagram of why it's not an issue for this tool. I could go and wax lyrical about it. What am I seeing there? Am I seeing no, it's a bit of goo, waxy stuff. I thought it was a bit of flake on the fingerboard. Okay, so we have the the tool copying the action, sorry, the relief, and then I drop off the string, and I'm going to just let this is 400 grit paper. It's not even that new, so it's not going to cut very quickly, but you can see, I can see it's pretty flat already, because we're cutting almost all the frets, almost all simultaneously. So I'm just going to give them a little dusting so that we take off any slight high spots that are still there, causing a tiny bit of zinging It doesn't hurt to now just clear that up, and it's just, that's probably all it needs on that track, and then I should be able to just play this through. Yeah, you can just hear the effect of a couple of tiny high frets up there, but it really is, I mean, we're talking a tiny amount now on this guitar. It's very, very accurate already. I mean, it's accurate, it's pretty accurate already, and we've got a very low action set, so this is really kind of, this is demanding the tightest, most accurate clearances going. I mean, that's what you do when you set a low action and you push it this way. Yeah, it's the luxury of being able to do it, and you know, the advantage of this method is really clear in that it is a little bit more accurate than doing it with any of the other traditional methods. And you know, some people do come on YouTube and tell me to stop being a dick and just flatten the neck and take a file to it, for God's sakes, and why am I doing this ridiculous stuff? And the reason I'm doing this is A, because it's a tiny bit more accurate for a bunch of reasons I'm not going to go into, but the main reason is for what I'm doing right now, which is the ability to just level until the notes free up, just like that, in which case I can stop precisely when I've leveled the frets enough to make the action that I've chosen play, but no more. And that saves fret metal, and that is it's something that, well, quite obviously you can't do unless you've got the strings on. So unless you do it some form of this fashion, there is a tool you can buy called the katana, which does the same thing. A very elegant tool, but more expensive by about $150. This costs virtually nothing, but the principle is the same. It's leveling with a slight curve in the tool that matches the curvature of the action that you've chosen, and like this it proceeds then to level the frets until the chosen action plays cleanly, and then you stop. So you know, it's the principle is the same, as that it respects the life of the frets basically. Because it's also thin, this allows me to level a little bit more needed. This allows me to level without worrying about if it is a compound radius, because it's such a thin cross section of the radius that it doesn't matter whether it's different from one end to the other. The curvature difference is so slight when you take a thin slice that it really isn't going to flatten out the difference in the radius at all. Well, it will do if you use a broad 1-inch file, and it will do if you use a radius block, because you can't have a radius block that recognises and respects a compound radius, but this does, and that's again one of the beauties of it. It's the only method I know of that will honour and respect the compound radius, which is great. So I can see there's some frets right at the top here that are relatively high, but we're playing all the way up, so that's good. So this is worth doing for that extra bit of accuracy and precision. And then obviously the next thing I do then is because I've leveled some flat spots onto these frets, the next stage is to do what hadn't been done before on these by the looks of it, and that's to take off or round off the flat spots without adjusting any further the relative levelness that we've just achieved. So reprofiling is a careful operation to take off the sharp shoulders that we've created in these leveled frets, but without touching the perfectly relatively level tops of the frets. So it's a quite careful operation. But once we've done that, then we have frets that are returned to the nice arch form shape that they need to be to play properly. So again, you just test it. Tiny little bit up there. I'll do one more pass. But you can see it's very, very straightforward in its simplicity. Actually, it's a very elegant, simple method, and you really don't need to use downward force. You've got to let a bit like a saw in woodwork. You've got to let the tool do its work, and then move on. And you notice I'm basically recalibrating the curvature in the tool each time I move a slice of the neck radius. Yeah, really, yeah. Each time I move, and each time as I move, I'm finding that it needs to be a little bit more curved. So it's what I knew when I checked the relief in the first place. The relief was greater this side than that side, so it's kind of telling me that right now, which is why I'm having to make a small adjustment as I come this way, just to fill that curve as it actually expands across the radius of the guitar. So you know it makes sense. You know, like I said, the ability to stop when it's playing and not go any further is a no-brainer, really. Imagine what I would be doing if I was using a radius block at this point with the neck off. I would just be, first of all, I'd be flattening out any compound radius. I'd be imposing whatever the radius was on the block. And the second thing is, when would I know to stop? And most people would say, well, when you've taken some metal off all of them and you've got your fret rocker out. But your fret rocker is measuring an absolute. It's measuring an absolute relative levelness. And remember, we don't need absolute level. We need relative level for the action we've chosen. We don't need anything. I'm happy to leave residual unevenness below the level of the action I've chosen, because I don't care about it. If I did care about it, if it became an obsession that I made it absolutely level, then I'm taking off material for the sake of it that I don't need to take off. It's not necessary. So it's yeah, it's elegant, this system, I have to say. It's very elegant. So we're nearly there, and one more track to do, as I call them. And again, tiny bit more relief curve needed in this, a little tiny adjustment, and I'm away. And if you're interested in doing this, my ebook shows you how to make the tool. It's very simple, but it shows you how to do it. It tells you the bits you need and everything, and it also talks you through and shows you in a couple of exclusive videos exactly how to use it. And you know, it takes a little bit of experience and time, but it guides you through how to do it for the first time and get some of that experience, and it becomes second nature after a while. So I'm just taking off a couple of high points here, right on the edge. I can see, and it's consistently all the way across these top three, but particularly the very last fret has been high all the way across. So it's a problem in this sequence. I'm more or less happy with that. So that's my fret leveling done. Got my stuff out of the way, and presto, we can now ditch the sacrificial strings. They've done their work. We don't need them anymore. What's good about this system too is that whatever happens now, we can slack these off, chuck them away, keep them, do whatever we want. And when we next, of course the neck is going to relax. As soon as we put another set of tens on this guitar, it's going to assume the position. It's going to go back into the configuration, the relative levelness, low action that it was just then. So that's the beauty of it. It'll go back into playing conditions to where we had it. The reason it's more accurate, by the way, is that I'll just leave it at you're leveling with the effects of compression at play, whereas when you're doing it with the neck off and passively flattened, you've taken compression out of the equation. And I have to say, evidence has shown, or experience has shown, that the effects of compression actually do change the way that the frets sit in relation to each other. Now it's absolutely minuscule, but then every measurement we're dealing with here is minuscule, so don't be surprised by that. So it's but that minuscule change in the way the frets sit because of the effects of longitudinal compression, which is not at play when you level frets in the passively flattened position. The difference between the positions is enough to give you a accuracy improvement of a few percent, and it's not massive. You know, don't get all worried about it. If you take your neck off and you do you know, you do it in a passive manner, it's absolutely great. It's a huge boost on the playability of your guitar. From, I mean, you know, I'm not putting it down, I'm just saying it's a there is a quantitative improvement in accuracy when you do it this way. But as you can probably guess, that small percentage increase in accuracy isn't why I do it. It's for the preservation of fret material is why I do it. So that's the principal payoff. So it isn't chasing that couple of extra milliliters, no, millimeters of, or percent I should say, of accuracy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to take a StewMac crowning file, which I always say isn't technically the wrong term. We're not actually touching the top of the fret, so we're not really crowning it. I'm going to use the file to reprofile any of the flattened areas so that they become arch form again, and they look like pretty much jumbo frets to me. But yeah, I'll go with the jumbo side on this. What I'll also do off camera, because it's noisy, I'm then going to take a what's the word for it? A Dremel thingy. I'd like to get a fine point in there. I'll take a Dremel sanding doofer and see, I can't draw anything in there. I've got no more lead in my pencil. Anyway, I'm gonna get a sanding thing and just basically sand off everything I don't need above the slots here. So I'm just marking these up so I can see when I'm getting close to the mark. Yeah, I'll just grind that flat basically, and then we'll have a nice low profile nut. So what I'll do is I will go off camera for a bit now. I'll just show you as I start off with this. Use the jumbo side, just run it across the top, and it basically will gently cut away the edges of the flat spot, and I will keep going until I stop and leave the thinnest possible black line of marker down the centre, and that tells me that I haven't touched the top, and that's really important because it means I've left, if I can leave all the tops untouched, it means the relative levelness is preserved. And even if I do just touch the top for a split second, then I just need to stop at that point, not go any further. So you can kind of back off, or if you know when you've just touched it. So the flatter they are, the more work they take, like that second one. But once we've done it, then after that, off camera as well, I'm going to then polish. I'll mask off the neck and then I'll polish all the frets with 3 grades of sandpaper and a whole set of micro mesh. And once that's done, I'll finish it off with some Autosol chrome polish, and then we're ready to restring it, test it out, and then the final couple of stages will be the intonation, followed by the last bit will be the setting of the floating tremolo, for which I will use the Trudeau method. I don't know how to say his name, but Italian luthier who put a great set of videos online showing how to simply set your Strat 2-point floating tremolo, or 6-point 6-screw tremolo as well. He shows both options, but he did it, and he's done it in a very direct and simple, very elegant way, very easy to follow. And the only thing I used to use it quite a lot, but because I never quite understood what was happening, although I knew it worked each time, I eventually had to make a video showing me doing it and explaining it. And if you're interested, you'll be able to. I'm not going to explain it while I do it today. I'm just going to do it. I've got my instructions on the wall, and I just follow them. As eventually they'll become second nature. But if you want to, while I'm doing it, or after I've done it, if you want to kind of get your head around what's actually happening, you should be able to work it out from what you see. But if you can't, then I have got a video somewhere on my channel which talks about explaining it, or explicitly explains it, so you could go and look at that. But at all times I acknowledge my debt of gratitude to Galeazzo Frudua, the Italian luthier, Beatles harmonies expert, Beatles tribute band I think as well plays in, but you know, it's a very good, clever way of doing it, and you know, total hats off to him for codifying it, shall we say, and putting it out in video form, because it saved me loads of time in the past. And it's great because it's rendered something that used to be way overthought and over worried about. And I know that loads of people avoid buying guitars with floating tremolos or even Floyd Roses, because they just believe that the whole thing of the tremolo is just so complicated it's almost not worth the trouble. And actually Galeazzo Frudua's method is so elegantly simple. But it just vexed me a bit because I kept using it and getting great results but not knowing what was happening. And that's, if you know anything about me, you know I hate that. I don't even like getting great results if I don't know what's going on. So I had to work it out, and actually what I found is that I even found some kind of flaws in how he was explaining it, which is fine, you know, we're all flawed, but I've kind of simplified it a bit, I think, in how I explained it. But all power to him for having devised it in the first place and saved people like me tons of time. Okay, I'm going to do the nut flattening and then the masking off, so I'll see you a bit later on. Right, lunch break and a moment of swinging in the hammock done. Time to restring this baby, and once I've restrung it, then it's a matter of setting the intonation and then finally the floating tremolo sustain. So let's get with the stringing first. It's always the blues first, isn't it? The blues. Right, so it's all looking good and feeling good so far. Beautiful shiny polished frets. Cut the nut down to size. I've connected up the double redundancy extra earthing wire thing, bridge ground, just in case. It was sort of not over the top exactly, because I just think it may, I'm anticipating that, you know, the damage to the, what do you call them, those things, posts, is quite difficult to arrest. The forces are pretty huge that go through those bushings, and so I never count my chickens that they're going to hold together permanently, just because it's, you know, the sheer sort of physics of the whole thing. It's, come along. Okay, I don't know where that string went. Oh, there it is. Yeah, the physics is a. Oh, the radio just went off. It's okay. Yeah, so physics-wise, it's a lot of loading. So if it doesn't work out, then Ryan has the option to block it off, I should say, and then spare earth grounds the bridge, even if there are no springs in there loading the thing. But that's down the line. But it doesn't do any harm because it's just an extra, currently it's just an extra earth, which doesn't make any difference at all, but it leaves a bit of possible functionality in there. So that's a 10 top E, and we're this is all good condition. I'm not even gonna oil this. It's pretty good as is. I don't like chucking oil on for no good reason. So I'm gonna wire this up my normal way. These are Easy Lock Wilkinsons, but I just use them. Don't use the Easy Lock function. I just go through the top bit and do my once over the loose wire, once under the loose wire routine, there's a kind of locking mechanism. The easy lock thing sounds like a good idea, but it's actually, I found it can lull you into a false sense of security, particularly on the higher strings. If you go through at 90 degrees on the high strings, you will get them slipping off. It doesn't, you know, one 90 degree turn through there isn't enough to lock off the thin plain steel strings. It's as simple as that, and you know, it's an expensive and annoying way to discover that. Wow, this thing's barely off the deck. There we go. So first things first, we'll set the intonation. I'll double check the action, obviously, but then set the intonation, and then once that's done, I'm going to do the tremolo, for which, as I mentioned before, I have the Fredua instructions on the wall, which I'll consult as I do it, just so I can sort of talk my way through it. I'm pretty certain I know what it is now, but I like to have them there just in case. Same as often I'll have a wiring diagram handy for whatever I'm doing, even though most basic things now I can remember how they go. I just like to make sure. It saves me a lot of time. So there's no truss rod cover on this guitar, and I don't have a spare anywhere, so it's just going to stay as is, and there's no back plate either. So that's just how it is. It's a good old vintage thing. Right. Speed up. Okay, we're on the last string here. Got plenty of other things I need to be doing today, like some necks down there on the stool, which are for oak casters, and I need to just check the angles of the neck pockets that I've already cut and route a couple changes into them, probably. I've got one setup ready to go as is. Right, let's dump those. Let's get into a bit of a stretching thing here. So the usual thing of getting all of the slack out of the strings as quick as possible. You can see, I don't know how well you can see, but the nut is now a nice flat tidy little thing compared to the great mountainous thing it was before. I just remember where my 10 top E is in case I go and bust one of these. So this has a slight tilt back in the headstock, this guitar, so it doesn't have any retaining string trees. Okay, I'll give this a couple of pulls from the front. My goodness, right now that action is almost unfeasible. Got a little bit of extra material I'd like to shave off there, but it's quite difficult to do it without making contact with the edging and the lacquer. Mind you, this has had loads of knocks in its time, so it's not exactly pretty in that department, but don't want to do any damage to it. so more stretching while we're there. This is a very flat neck at the moment. I mean, it has a little bit of relief in it, but it feels flat and fast, so it's definitely a shredder beast, as mentioned. Again, I forgot to check the neck radius. Did it look flatter than the 12? Meh. Doesn't look like, to me, to the eye, it doesn't look like it changes along the way, I have to say. I would say it's the same radius all the way along, personally, but I could be wrong. There's a reason to move this up. Let's get a gentle pull on this. That can work. There's something loose in here now. It could be a spring. Okay, more stretching. Just looking at these, the toppy is a little bit higher than I had. In fact, the toppy and the B are a tiny bit higher than the other ones. I may or may not adjust them, but let's just stretch them out for now. I mean, they're all low, let's put it that way, but just my perfectionism kicking in. Stretching, stretching, stretching. Still, the tremolo plate's still flat on the deck, which is good. Just want to get the last bits of natural slack out of the string, and then we're in a position to do more dependable intonation. Now, having removed the buzz fighting nut, what I've done now is returned the scale length back to what it actually was in the book. Oh, hellfire, sorry, I've got, no, we're on plane mode, that's good. I'm just going to slack this off and move the string up the post. It's kind of gone, it's gone down. That's it. I just want to bring it to a tighter wrap. So do the same with this one. Just the way the string's fallen on the, what's it, might as well not have it stretched out too far. That is about the lowest action you're going to see for miles. Just tune it one more time, get some good solid tugs, and then we'll do the intonation. Spiders in my hair from outside. Hair? You know what I mean. Head. Something down here is loose and I've got to find out what it is. So the tuning and everything seems to be very smooth and very stable, so there's no clicking or pinging, which is great. I do think these are a tiny fraction too high, just minuscule amount, so I'm going to take my 13, no, not my 13, that one, yeah, my 13 and my 17, and I'm going to make a tiny tweak, if I can find the thing. Where's the thing? The thing. What am I looking for? I'm looking for that thing. 0.3. It just to my perfectionist eye, they are a incy wincy little bit higher than the others. So I'm just going to bring them into line. Yeah. See. So we go 17. Trouble being in the spring garden creatures. So the thing about getting the tuning stable is, first of all, yes, getting the nut slots to the right height, or to the exact first fret action that we're aiming for, and the other thing is to get it so that there's no gripping, the strings aren't catching anywhere along the travel through the nut, which in this case it isn't. So that's excellent. You can hear it. When it is catching, you'll hear pinging noises, and even the tiniest amount of pinging will cause tuning problems, because it means that there's an unequal tension building up between the string on one side of the nut and on the other, and it's that unequal tension that kind of holds the string, and when the string pings, it means the tension basically is evened out. But in evening it out, a piece of string moves that way and enough to detune you just slightly, and it's very annoying. So it's really critical to get that right first. Some people resort to using various lubricant solutions in the slots, and I think it's not a very good strategy, because even if you temporarily overcome the stickiness of the slot with some lubricant, as soon as that lubricant kind of wears out or runs dry, you'll get the stickiness back and your tuning problems will return with a vengeance. So that's good. I always recommend that you get the clearance through the nut slots absolutely perfect, as well as the height first, and then once you've got that, then add some lubricant, which I'm going to do in a minute, because I've got my, wherever it's gone, I brought my graphite powder back out from in the house. So we are pretty much on the ball here. So tuning is progressive, smooth, and no pings. I actually think this may even be too low a playing action for my liking at this moment in time. Barely on 1mm. I'll do a close-up look with my other glasses just now to get this right. But it's obviously, actually I won't do it yet, but it's going to change now when we do the intonation. So let me do, when we do the setting of the tremolo into floating mode, it's going to change. So the first thing I'm going to do is we'll do the tuning intonation, get the right words, intonation bit first. So for that I'm going to need the amp, my tuner set to iStrobo Soft, which is what I use. Quite a few people ask me what the tuner is. It's made by Peterson Tuners. Come on. And it's pretty good. It's about £4 or £3, whatever, in UK monies for the app. I think there's other. Now I need a strap, but I haven't got one. Annoying. Have to do it sort of standing. Okay, so just going to tune. Ooh, the knobs are weird. So we're going to tune it on the harmonic and ping it. So ping it to tune and then fret it, and if they're the same note, then it's intonated, which it is. And I've had these all off and put them back on, so I've done it purely by eye, luck really. Short, so I can see it as well. It's pretty accurate. So we come back, and no, the other way. We'll come back on this one. Again, all the time listening out for the feeling and listening for the pings down at this end. Slightly sharp. And it needs to come back a bit. Lengthen the string, in which case I'm going to move these others to accommodate. Sharp. Sharp, so pull this one back as well, and this one. Sharp, that'll do. Okay, bit of a pull. I've got one last thing, well, after the tremolo setup, there'll be one more thing to do, and that'll be just to lightly sand out the lacquer repairs on the back. springy out. Yeah. Okay. We are pretty much done on the intonation front, which is good. Pattern of intonation is as you'd imagine it. Okay, so that's that done. That's all good, all good. We'll move on swiftly to the next bit, which is to set the tremolo in the floating mode. Now this is kind of like the black magic part. Next to you're going up for a snooze. See you in a bit. Okay. Right, let me just get this out of the way. Okay, so the tremolo part, the fun part. So we have our floaty thing. The first thing it will say is tighten the tremolo claw bolts until the tremolo is almost all the way in, which I'm going to now do, which is going to do not much more than is already done because it's already in. So we just start with it fairly far in, lock down, flat, all is good. Ah, I need the arm. That's what I need. Here's the arm. Wilkinson arm, so it's got no screw on it. It's just a smooth thing. Now, the point about this is we're going to want to set this with a certain amount of downward well, an unlimited downward movement, which we're getting there, and a certain amount of upward movement. So obviously the thing can't sit straight, it can't sit flat on the deck of the guitar. So to get some backward movement, the tremolo has to be sort of canted up like this, and it has to be canted up a certain amount. And the issue about setting it is how far up must it be to give you a predictable or dependable amount backwards. And sometimes you know it's not actually that difficult to just set it with some backward movement, but the secret is how do you set it with predictable range. And I learned from Mr. Frudua that the sort of predictable range or familiar range of movement that people would go for normally would be a tone and a half on the G, a tone on the B, and half a tone on the high E. So that's what this procedure aims for. So what we do is we get some post-it notes. This is the genius bit. Thanks to Mr. Frudua, we get some post-it notes, and it says, first of all, we've tightened the tremolo bolts so that the tail end of the tremolo is sitting flat on the guitar top. And then it says, press down the arm until, or push in enough post-it notes until we've got a almost perfectly horizontal movement of the hop movement, so that the plate is almost perfectly horizontal with the body. Now with a guitar like this, because of the way the post sits slightly out and the hourglass bit where the thing pivots is slightly raised above the deck, it means to get this thing sitting flat, it's either, when it's under sprung tension, it's either sitting slightly back and touching the back plate and there's a gap at the front, or now we've propped it up with some post-it notes so that we've made the plate horizontal. That's the aim of this particular movement. So we make it horizontal. I still need my bleeding amplifier and thing, it just gets cluttered. Yeah, so we get the amp and the tuner back out because we're going to need some, forgot this bit, we're going to need to check the notes here. But it's a really smart way of doing it, very impressive way of doing it. So we start with the guitar plugged in, obviously. We've got our bar facing horizontal, or the plate is parallel to the body, and now we're going to plug in to get a note. So it says tune the G string to pitch with its little tail end kicked up a bit. So now this is, let's put it under a bit of support here, because otherwise it's going to be tilting back. So we're going to tune the G. Now you can see probably that it's saying F sharp there. So we tune to G, right? There we are, G. Tune G string to pitch. Then it says remove the post-it notes, and then there was a ping I heard there, so there's a possible something in the nut that needs looking at. Then it says lower the arm so that G turns from G to E, and prop it up with post-it notes until that holds. So there's our E. Shove a load of post-it notes under. Oh, a bit more, maybe one more sheet. So you can see it's now holding it from the G it was. I have to press it further down just to get the paper to go under. It's just flat of E, but that will do, right? Because the alternative is slightly sharper B. So then we've tuned it so that the notes hold, the post-it notes hold the tuning of the G string now at E. Okay, and then it says tune all strings to pitch with the post-it notes still in place. So we need G. So you can tell now that the guitar is going to be out of tune as soon as I let go of these post-it notes. The first thing to know is that screwing in the screws all the way in has cut out the forward motion for the time being, has cancelled out the forward motion of the tremolo unit, so it's now allowing us to do the tuning as a hardtail effectively. Now what we're doing is obviously we're setting up a three-step, basically this is the process by which we're setting up a three-step capability to bend backwards. So we tune this now to the normal pitch, and as soon as we take the post-it notes away, the springs, because the claws are right the way in, it's going to pull the back down and this whole guitar is going to go sharp. But the genius bit comes in a minute. I don't like this G string. I'll tell you why afterwards. So just tuning. Okay, we're tuned to pitch. Now I take this out, it's all gone sharp. But then, here's the magical bit. It says, pick up the guitar. I can't really do it very well because of the stupid, I haven't got a strap, but pick up the guitar and use the claw tuning at the back to return it to pitch. So we tune it by slacking off the tremolo claw. So we have an A sharp there. So now we bring out the screws in the tremolo claw until that G becomes G again. So we see what it's doing. A, so it's heading downwards. I'm doing both sides, sort of trying to keep it pretty much equal. A, now keep coming down. Now as that's happening, what's obviously going to happen now is the string pull is going to overcome the spring pull, and the back end of the tremolo is now rising up, and it will stop at whatever height it needs to give us the range of backward movement that we've programmed into it, which is that tone and a half. It's very clever. Good old Galeazzo Frodua. G sharp, still more to go. a bit noisy and a little bit hard to get in there. I'm going to stop on the G, still sharp of G. Noisy, 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 sharp of G. I've lost my plectrum. Where's it gone? Right, now flat. Now we need to go back in with the tremolo arm, and we're screwing it back in to get this to be a G. Just a tiny bit more. And that, basically, once we get to the G, on that G, tiny bit out, almost there. Feel it now. So now we have the guitar almost perfectly in tune. It won't be ever perfect, but what we have is E to F, see? E, F, B, slightly sharper B, but don't worry about that. B2 should go to the C sharp. There we are. And then G to A sharp. There we go. So we've got as much downward as we want, and a dependable range of tone back. And now we can now fine tune that. This is, it might just still be a little unstable for a minute because it's floating, but we're nearly there, so it shouldn't be too bad. I'm going to double check these slots as well with a bit of sandpaper, give them a little bit of a treatment followed by some lubricant. And we're getting, whoops, we've got some slippage on the G still, so, on the E, so. I hope there's nothing moving in the tremolo anchor, we don't know. Be not enough springs power in here. Just a thought. I'm going to have a little feel, but anyway, it's set to the correct range, but it's a little bit, I don't know what the word is, a little bit lethargic in returning to position there. so I don't know whether it may well need another spring to be pulling it, adding to the pull. Anyway, I'm going to just sand out these slots for a minute and then put some lubricant in there once that's done, and then we shall be on to take it indoors and strap it up and play it for a bit. Here we go. So I'm just going to use my blade, if I can find one, a blade, and what I was just a little bit concerned about, I wasn't massively thrilled with the tone, and I don't know why, of the G string on this. So it has me a little bit puzzled. I don't know where my great now there it is. Yeah, just a little bit puzzled, and I'm going to do a little bit of investigation into that. Something about this lacking a bit of sustain, and I don't quite know why, and I hope it isn't to do with any problem as a result of this broken section. I hope that's not kind of a hangover of that, because I can't see any reason why not. I mean, the posts are glued in, they should be rock solid. As far as the guitar solidity of it is concerned, it should be pretty straightforward. But let's see what we get in a minute. Sorry, it's a bit boring, this bit. So it's kind of fine tuning, but that's the principle. Don't forget, obviously, as a floating trem, anything you do in terms of slacking one off will completely throw the whole thing off, so you can expect the tuning to go awry as soon as you take the load off one string in order to take it out and put some lubricant in there. So it's always going to be a bit of juggling around to get it back into tune for a moment. I mean, that's why I like the locking tuner systems that you get with Floyd Roses. Personally, let's just plug this in for a minute. Might as well have power assisted tuning. As soon as you slack it off, you can hear the different notes going sharp as you take the load off one big heavy wound string. All the thinner strings go sharp. But so what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to widen a little bit on the slot so there's no sticking, just to make absolutely sure. And then I'm putting a bit of graphite powder in there to lubricate it out as well. So as a final touch. Then we'll get it all tuned back up and give it some welly. Now, if I were to add another spring to it, I'd need to redo the setup process really for the tremolo, because it's changed. An extra spring changes pretty much everything in the whole lineup. It's completely differently configured, so in principle it should work with just the two, and you know, obviously it works as a combination of the springs and how stretched they are. You know, so if you have more springs, they wouldn't have to be under such great tension, and less number of springs, more likely they're going to be under greater tension to achieve the same required pull or counteract pull of the strings. Okay, so this is the last one. I'm just going to use the thickness of the paper in this slot to try and just make sure it's nicely cleaned out and widened, and then we'll put in the graphite. again, but oh, no strap, this is annoying. Just try and take that slack back out. When you're retuning like this, it will always take a short while to balance itself up. Things to do, so I'm going to stop that right there. I'm going to take it indoors and I'm going to give it some welly and see how it holds up as a floating trem, because obviously I'm not entirely sure about how those posts are holding up in that repaired area in there. So well, let's give it a go. At the moment there's something not quite right. I thought it was the string, but actually there's something not quite right with that humbucker pickup. There may be a fault in it. It's sort of dying off. It's not sustaining the note quite right. So I don't know if it's something to do with old age. I'm not an expert on what goes right or wrong with humbuckers, to be honest. So I can't really tell on that. But I'm going to play it indoors later on and evaluate it. And then I'll also do the little bit of sanding on the back there, on the bits I filled up the chips. But other than that, we have it. There we have it. Oh yes, one more thing, of course, I forgot that last thing. What changes at this point is the height of the playing action as a result of the kick up of the tremolo plate. Now that's now raised up to close to 2, which we can take down now by counterclockwise turns on the so we go back down to our 1.5, very easy to do. So we're just literally resetting the action. That's going to affect the tuning, which I'll take care of later, but just for now I'm going to visually reset the height of the action, and then we can take care of the fine tuning indoors. Okay, so, and I'll also be able to listen out closer for whatever it is that is or isn't happening on this this humbucker. I'm not sure if it was kind of losing output at various moments, a kind of fluctuating output or something. It seemed a little odd. Okay, let me just get my super duper specs on, and then once we've got this action bit taken care of, we're done in the main with this. You can see it's tilted up at the back. That's our position required to get the backward pitch raise that we're after. Okay, so we're not quite on 1.5 there, so I'll raise a smidgen. Now if we wound this down or cancelled out the floating part of it, and set it as a hardtail, then we'd need to readjust the action again because it would go low again. So every time you change the orientation of this, or the mode of this tremolo or this vibrato system, then you have to readjust. Okay, very small adjustments now. Let's get this G right. Tiny bit down. So look, still very high. Down, down, and down, and down. Okay, we should be on the ball. Final fret. See, it's a little bit high on the top E. Okay, we're almost there. Okay. Out of tune, understandably. Right, we'll leave that there, take it indoors, give it a play. Yes, as I say, what I thought was something wrong with the G string, actually. What I was hearing is some sort of fluctuation there, and I don't know if there's some electrical thing going on, but it's kind of, I don't know if it's in the switching, which is in the little sealed box, or not, but it just didn't feel quite right. So I'll play it some and try and gauge whether there is something actually amiss. I'm off with it. Anyway, meantime, there we have it. And just a final look before we go away. The Maverick F4, hopefully restored bridge. Again, we'll not count our chickens before they've hatched. We'll put the tremolo in. Hold on 1 second, sorry. Tremolo in. Yeah. F4 Phantom, no, F4 Maverick. New non-buzz fighting nut. Leveled frets. Some lacquer fills on the back here which I'll sand out so that it'll be nice and smooth. A little extra earth wire in there, and that's that done. And look what's waiting for me every few minutes on this lovely spring day is a bit of work. 20 minutes in the hammock listening to the radio. It's a hard life, but hey, I've got plenty to do, and I don't know if you can see there, but there's an absolute pile of necks, and under there there's a pile of oak casters ready to go, so I've got my work cut out. I'll see you soon with another guitar.